Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Amplify Your Business. Today, I'm talking to Peter Kasper. He's the founder and CEO of Terpli, and they describe themselves as your AI-driven virtual budtender. What does that mean, Peter?
So Terpli, as you mentioned, is an AI-driven virtual budtender where we're able to guide consumers online to buy the best product across the hundreds of options available at your local dispensary, and then also improve the experience through a review rating platform that allows us to actually tailor our recommendations down to your individual preferences. So the more that you engage with Terpli, the more Terpli becomes your personal budtender.
So now, obviously, this is all around the cannabis industry for those maybe who weren't completely picking up on that. And so a very new industry in the grand scheme of things. You're located down in the States and I'm up here in Canada. And our governments have taken a couple different approaches, or in this case of the States, every state is very different in terms of the regulations. This must be just a nightmare for an entrepreneur to try to navigate through all the ins and outs of some of these regulatory issues. Am I correct on that?
Absolutely. I mean, when you're not allowed to cross over state lines with product or any type of machinery that touches the plant in any way, all of a sudden it just fosters these completely fragmented, informal series of economies where each market operates as its own distinct market with its own regulations, its own, pricing system. The way that everything operates is built from scratch. So getting to target specific ones becomes very challenging when each has its own nuances to it.
Yeah. And so how do you tackle that as a startup company? Because I think you were saying before we hit the record button, you've been in business for about 18 months. So you opened in the middle of COVID in this industry that there is all sorts of restrictions and challenges that are inherent to it. So how do you start a business in that kind of environment and still maintain the flexibility, I guess, that's required?
So COVID is actually a huge reason that we were even able to start the business up. So I started Terpli while getting my MBA from USC. And along that process, I actually, in joining the graduate program, had the chance to found and lead our first business to cannabis organization called the Marshall Cannabis Association, which I led as president during my 2 years there. Starting this operation from scratch basically forced me to build all the programming at USC from the ground up. So getting speakers, recruitment opportunities, educational, different sessions and workshops, all that was just on me, essentially, to build up from the ground. And the beauty of COVID is that when everybody's sitting behind their laptops, no one's leaving their house, everyone all of a sudden becomes accessible. It created this really unique opportunity to start tying all these insights and knowledge from around the country that previously wasn't accessible, given that each state really was kind of confined just to its own market.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, I find anyway, in talking to entrepreneurs who started up in the middle of COVID, because there was so many people that I knew who were business owners, that were going, dragging their business through COVID, trying to figure out how to make their business model make sense or work in that period of time. And so, most of those people would say that it was probably one of the most difficult periods of their whole entrepreneurial journey. And yet there were so many businesses that were actually starting up in the middle of it. And so it's just really interesting to see how entrepreneurs are able to find opportunities in the midst of all that challenge and adversity and so on. Now, you didn't start it because of COVID, though. Where did you see the opportunity? Like, why did this seem to be like a business that you wanted to tackle, I guess?
So Terpli really started as a passion project while I was in graduate school. So I'm in California. It's my first time in a legal and really mature and robust market. And I'm a passionate consumer. And my thinking and also leading the club was I have to be an expert on whatever I can be an expert on. And from a personal standpoint, that was understanding the landscape, product types, but primarily how to understand how to get desired outcomes from a product that you're experiencing. So I took this workshop hosted by this thought leader in the space called Kristen Yoder, which basically dove into this idea behind terpenes. Terpenes are just aromatic chemicals. They are what I like to call smells. everything has a terpene to it: coffee, trees, nature. But the cannabis plant ends up producing these that have a very influential impact over the outcome for a consumer. All of a sudden, when I learned about this and that all this information was actually tied to a lab test that was required for a product to be sold in the legal market, I felt like I just been given a treasure map to my eye. It was just in a language I didn't understand quite yet. And so with that in mind, and leveraging my own background with finance and applied mathematics, so very quantitatively heavy, I basically set out to start aggregating all these lab tests and start using it to start predicting how a product would make me feel before I even tried it to begin with. After collecting these things, recording my experiences for it, I essentially began the architecture for what is now a recommendation engine, how you can take feedback that a user gives to then personalize your experience based off of the chemistry behind the product itself. Because cannabis is so personal, this is powerful implications, because all of a sudden we're actually able to deliver the effects that a user wants or needs from an end product for it. And along this pathway, I'm in graduate school, I have this idea that I've been working on. I just decided to battle test it throughout the entire program. So my focus was technology commercialization and entrepreneurship. Perfect opportunity to just go and throw a bunch of business models against the wall to see what sticks. And after I graduated, I poured in a little bit of seed capital, hired my first team of developers, and began going through R&D and development.
Huh. Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating, because there's no other parallel that I can think of in terms of like consumption, like things that people would be consuming that would have that level of analysis to and predictability, I suppose, to how somebody's going to react to a particular variety or strain. You know, the only parallel I can think of is thinking of the wine industry as an example, where all the different grapes produce a different flavor profile and so on, but it's much more complicated than that, because you can get so much variation between, you know, so many different growers of the exact same grape, and just in the way that they grew it, the soil it was from, and everything that goes into the actual production of it. And I would imagine you also get a tremendous amount of variation in the experience that you get from the bud as well in the cannabis plant too, in a very similar way. So to be able to basically track all that data, and then also have an engine that's going to give personalized recommendations based off of people's, you know, tracked likes and dislikes in the app, that's just brilliant.
Thank you so much. And the wine parallel is very powerful as well. And we actually have a lot of people from the wine industry who ends up coming into cannabis, given the similarities between them for it. And you may not, if you're familiar, there's an app called Vivino, which allows a user to essentially scan the label on a wine bottle, and it pulls up aggregated reviews and sommelier notes and ratings. And that was really my first inspiration for Terpli, because you would able to take this experience of going to a grocery store, seeing an aisle of hundreds of bottles, and I'm not a wine person, and that experience was extremely overwhelming for me. What Vivino provided was a way where you could just take your phone out and just snap a picture, like boom, 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 down the aisle, and immediately get ratings and all these other dimensions to evaluate your decision on. And I was like, why doesn't that exist for cannabis right now? And that got me down the whole pathway of how you can start to understand and digest and even analyze the available components behind a product to predict what would be best for a consumer.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, so every journey has its challenges. What have been your biggest challenges that you've faced in this first 18-month sprint, I guess, that you've been on so far?
Oh, geez. Something that you brought up a little bit earlier, it's the idea of flexibility for this. And it kind of has a three-pronged element to it. So the first is being a technology company. At its core, we are a technology and data company here. And for that, we've brought in a lot of methodologies for different agile and making sure that we're operating very leanly with the way that we manage everything, our developers, because flexibility there at its core is so key to product development nowadays. And when you're constantly testing and experimenting, that flexibility is so key for it. The second element here is we're a technology company in the cannabis industry. The cannabis industry brings its own set of nuances and complications to it. Like I mentioned before, when each market regulates itself differently than every other market, has its own licensing system and its own infrastructure to begin with, all of a sudden that adds so much complexity where there are certain states that we just can't operate in right now, given the fact that there are restrictions or there are limited data sets that we can plug into, or just not a robust dispensary market quite yet. So those nuances, and especially the fact that they can change very rapidly, means you have to be on top of this and you have to be flexible with that. The third thing on top of this is being a technology company in the cannabis industry during COVID. And everybody has dealt with their own types of frustrations and issues during the pandemic. Everybody has had friends who've been negatively impacted by this pandemic. And from ourselves internally, like we've had a lot of team members who've just had to step away because as a small company, we don't have a lot of resources. And if someone needs to support their family financially because someone is in the hospital or someone is very ill, given something that may have happened, all of a sudden we're going to have people who can no longer support Terpli. And the best thing we can do to support them is, quite frankly, let them go. And dealing with that and those types of hurdles and the random emergency visits just means that you have to be flexible, you have to stay grounded, and you just have to deal with the blows as they come and pick yourself up to keep moving forward.
Yeah, that's an interesting comment that you just made, just with regard to the human resource management aspects that are, somewhat unique to startups in the sense where you don't have the resources really usually to have all the support systems in place. And so, yeah, when you only have one person that's dedicated to this particular role within the company, you don't have a lot of duplicity there. And so when it comes then to an emergency, somebody has their attention pulled away in another direction, that can be devastating to the company. And so, yeah, that's a very interesting little piece of insight there that is somewhat unique to that startup world that we're in. And difficult for the employee themselves, to navigate too, because they're probably, they're coming in at maybe a discounted rate because they get a little piece of the action there. They got some skin in the game as well. And so it would be incredibly difficult for them to also step away in those moments in which it feels like they may be the best thing for them to do is to step away. So yeah, that's tough.
100%. And the way I like to see this is there's always two sides to the same coin here, where I started Terpli as a solopreneur doing everything myself. And when you're in that position, if you aren't doing something, it isn't getting done. Quite frankly, it goes fully stagnant when you're not directly putting your hands on something. And in this stage of the game now, I brought in another co-founder who's made life dramatically easier and more functional, I'd say, on my end of things. But at this point now, yes, these things happen, but I can't help but reflect, like, at least the whole ship isn't going down now when someone leaves. So we still have things moving, we're still going. And just for that, I'm fortunate to be in the stage that we're in.
Yeah, it's tough. I have been a solopreneur at the beginning. And then, as things have grown, we've gotten a lot more of a management team around the table, which is so nice. But yeah, when you're trying to make all the decisions and carrying the whole burden on your own shoulders, it's tough for sure. So now a question for you around the financing part of it. So startups are always interested in learning how other startups have financed their ventures. What approach did you take to that?
So my approach for this, with having very little cash as a resource, was sweat equity. I had this idea that I thought could make a dramatic and big impact in the cannabis industry, and was fortunate enough to get some other individuals and developers who were able to buy into that idea and really believe in this mission that we were set out to do. And so sweat equity has been a huge component for this. And quite frankly, given troubles raising capital, being a first-time founder myself, having to lean on that has been a huge asset, but it's also hurt in a couple of ways too. Passion can't feed people. Going back to what I mentioned beforehand, when it comes to the priorities that someone sets for themselves from a life standpoint, we fall down the totem pole because we're not giving them the key resources they need when they're in survival mode. And so that has had its own benefits and detriments. Of course, you have a cliff. So if someone isn't able to sustain it for that long, then it's like, like it is what it is. But even still, I think it's really served as a benefit where some of our developers here now who've been with us since day one are some of the best people that I could have asked for to start this venture with.
Yeah, I want to circle back to this topic around the sweat equity piece a little bit, just because I wonder if that also was another opportunity that COVID presented to you. Because in Canada, anyway, there was a lot of people that were receiving, subsidization from the government. They were receiving money to basically stay home. And I know in the US, there was different programs of a similar kind of nature in which there was an influx of cash into a lot of households. And when people were kind of stuck at home. And so did that also fuel that ability for people to be able to invest the sweat equity because they had some outside revenue coming in from some of these programs, or did that play much a role at all?
Not really at all. I mean, there was lift and support, but Los Angeles is expensive, which is where most of my team was. Like that was probably absorbed within a month.
Okay.
And so there really wasn't too much support in that end for things. And there were times where I was actually helping my team find other jobs so that they could support themselves.
Very interesting. Yeah. That's a different role, right? Now you're you're trying to manage the business, but you're also trying to, like you said, ensure that they can feed themselves as well. So yeah, it's a different challenge as an entrepreneur. Now, one thing that I did notice as well on your website is you have a fairly good sized advisory board. And so this is something that I see, quite prevalent in the startup space, especially in the tech startup space. And most of the people that I talk to anyway, who have those boards have gone through accelerators or some sort of mentorship program, incubation or something like that, where they're getting that outside advice. And in some cases, they're provided with a board. I understand that you didn't go through any of those programs. That was just something that you identified as a need and then created it yourself. Can you walk me through that decision a little bit and what your philosophy is there, and how do you use that board?
Absolutely. So starting off as the solopreneur, my thinking was that, and a first-time founder, is that I have my core competencies right now, but I have to do everything. And with COVID providing the opportunity to really expand my network to anybody in the country, it allowed me to also pitch this idea and talk about what I was doing to everybody in the country. And after a while, you'd have some individuals who would express interest and be like, I love talking back and forth. I love what you're working on. Like, if you want me to get involved, I'd be interested in doing that. And I saw this as a way where I could basically create my own mentors. Got to find people who have the skill sets that either I was lacking and they could help cover some of those gaps, or they were much better at what I wanted to be good at, and thus could help guide and direct me in that way for it. And I saw that as an immediate value add. And I think part of the impact was getting a mentor for the Marshall Cannabis Association, the graduate business of cannabis organization I started at USC, where I had a good friend turn into a really great mentor. His name is Mike Siebold, and he guided me along the process and helped provide me with speakers and recruiters and all these other types of resources to help build the organization. And I saw and felt firsthand the impact that having a good mentor and advisor could have. And I was like, I need to have this for my business right now. Like, the value here is immense for what I'm getting out of this. And so that just kind of started me down the pathway of how do I fill the gaps of what I don't currently have right now with people that I trust, that I know will support me in the long run.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how few non-tech oriented businesses have advisory boards. I mean, there is some informal coaching that happens just because you're bumping up with other entrepreneurs from time to time, and so there's a lot of informal things that occur, but yeah, to formalize that advisor role is something that few entrepreneurs do actually. And so it's one of those common threads that I'm identifying in the shows that we've done and the interviews that I've conducted, that some of the most successful, and especially the growth focused companies, the ones that are looking for rapid growth, are really leveraging that as a tool for their growth. It's really interesting. So I think you have the right model in place for sure. Now one of the things that before we hit the record button, you were saying that you're in a handful of dispensaries right now, and so obviously you have a product then that is working. And but at the beginning, I understood that you were kind of marketing more to the consumers, and then you did a shift to focusing on the dispensaries, and so now you're more business to business oriented. Can you walk me through that change, I guess, and maybe that draws back to what you were talking about in terms of needing to be flexible as an entrepreneur, and that's really a core strength that you have developed. But yeah, talk to me about how you did that transition, because that is a complete different business model, right? And so why and how did you do it?
Absolutely. So, like I mentioned before, Vivino was such a big inspiration for me. Like just the power of getting to hold your phone up to a product and immediately get information to help you make a decision. It's like, I need to build this for the cannabis space. So, our first iteration was actually a mobile app, which was what we then focused on after I had graduated from USC. And that was supposed to be a very multi-sided marketplace. So you're engaging with brands for lab information, retailers for inventory analyses, and then the consumer for engaging with everything and then interacting, leaving reviews, getting discounts, all that kind of stuff for it. Frankly, it was just too much. Dealing with all those types of relationships, all those different sides of the business as a solopreneur was very much a challenge for me. And I could go and pitch the hell out of Terpli to a bunch of investors. And I had training and a lot of practice doing this, and I could nail a pitch. But the key aspect is like, you're one person. You are too small to do this just yourself. In order to reach critical mass for users, you need a massive marketing budget, which you just don't have right now. And with cannabis being such a siloed industry, to make a splash, you need a lot of capital. And I just didn't have that.
Hmm.
So some really valuable feedback that I gotten from a pitch competition was hook on to a bigger player, get wind behind, kind of trailing behind them and just ride their success up with you. And we'd gotten some interest from some bigger e-commerce players like Dutchie and iHeart Jane, who pretty much provide the Shopify for cannabis dispensaries. And part of that was how we could integrate with their e-commerce storefront. We have this robust recommendation engine, this ability to take chemistry behind products and provide outcomes with high levels of confidence and accuracy. So all of a sudden it was like, how can we just go there now? While this was a next step in the roadmap, we just decided it would be more advantageous to flip it around and just focus on that angle first. And we were so lucky that the only main thing that changed was our front end of development, just the what I call go-to-market consumer-facing experience for Terpli. The back end, how we're organizing all the information and hosting it and securing it, the data science end for it, that stayed the same. But we just shifted how we went to market. And instead, we're like, if we just provide this to dispensaries, we are going to be where people are already going, which allows us that opportunity for exposure to reach critical mass and to add the value to the consumer, which is our end goal to begin with. So definitely a challenge transitioning. I think anyone going through that experience, it's definitely hard. And it takes a lot of market research to jump back in and really refine it down. But I could not be more confident with where we are right now in our business and the value we can provide, and just I love our product and what we can do.
Yeah, and this is something that I think needs to be stressed a bit, is that there sometimes, like, you can whiteboard out an idea, a business model, a plan, and it all looks really great until you start to put it in motion and you start to bump into some of those challenges, some of the hurdles, and then it's the people that can then pivot and iterate rapidly based off of the information they're receiving, the data that they're collecting from the either the bruises of getting knocked down every time you're trying to cross some sort of hurdle going down one direction, or not. Like it's just there's this challenge that you can't really anticipate everything in advance, no matter how much research that you do. You just sometimes have to just get in there and start doing it, and then allow that flexibility that you have built into your being, it seems like there, Peter, that allow that then to encourage the pivoting into the areas that you needed to. And so good on you for seeing that as you're in there, because sometimes we hold on to that idea just a little too tightly, and it's like, no, this is the type of company, or this is the model, or this is the customer, but having that flexibility and willingness to change is really good.
Not just that, but to change your business model, to change your strategy involves an immense level of trust from your team.
Yes.
They're the ones who got bought into your idea from the beginning, and all of a sudden that idea is changing, especially from a development side where they are purely internally focused, whereas I'm the one who's banging the drum and who's shouting from the mountaintops about the idea for everything.
Yeah.
And so that level of trust, I was honestly astonished at the commitment, the dedication that my team really brought to the table here, because they followed me through this transition for it. And from a leader perspective, talk about a golden sign that doesn't really matter what the idea is. It's just a belief that what you're doing has a big impact, and what they're doing is a key part of the mission.
Yeah, that's really astute observation in terms of the leadership challenge that presents, actually. And until you mentioned that, I wasn't even thinking about it, but you're right. Like, it's really difficult in a lot of circumstances for employees to embrace change. I mean, change is something that is really difficult for most. And so when they're also, they're investing that sweat equity piece of it, this is their life as well, their dreams and aspirations and so on. And so for them to also trust your judgment on that, yeah, that's a big responsibility that you bear as the founder, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I like to say that this is their baby as much as it is mine.
Yeah.
And I think that that cadence that I have with my team has just spurred some of the best innovation, some of the best collaboration that I could ever ask for. And it's one of those things where when everybody's for sweat equity, you have other entrepreneurs who want everything.
Yeah.
But it's kind of this mentality where you want 100% of nothing or percentage of something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would much rather share in what we're building here, especially given the fact that everybody's putting their best foot forward. Everybody's trying to collaborate as best as they can because we all believe in it.
Yeah. So there's, my audience is largely Canadian. I mean, we do have some international reach as well, but most of the people who are watching the show right now are in Canada, and they're probably wondering, hey, when is this actually going to be in Canada, or is it already? So can you give us a little insight into what the plan is there?
We are not currently in Canada, but that is purely because we just haven't gone there yet. There is no limitation for us going there. We're actively exploring opportunities in the Canadian market for it. In fact, we actually see it as being a pretty experimental market when it comes to new tech plays for it. So we're actually very excited to dive into it, actively looking at leads, actively looking at opportunities. So if there is a dispensary who's hearing this conversation right now, or someone who knows one that thinks that Terpli could be a benefit for it, we are 100% open and very eager to get our foot in the door there.
Excellent. And how would anybody who wants to reach out to you for whatever purpose, what's the best way to do so?
Yeah, so you can reach out to me directly at pcasper@terpli.io. For sales inquiries, just sales@terpli.io, and check out our website. This sounds redundant, terpli.io. So you can go ahead and book a demo with my co-founder, Eric Mercado, to get to see exactly what Terpli is, the value we can bring, and how we can get it to a dispensary near you.
Thank you so much, Peter. I really appreciate it. And for those of you who want to reach out to Peter, you got the details now. And so check out Terpli. Terpli is your AI-driven virtual Budtender. And if you like this show, definitely check out our archives over at amplifyyourbusiness.ca. That's where you're going to find all of our past shows and future shows. And if you prefer to listen to it in podcast format, then you can find us basically on all the major podcast platforms out there. So until next time, everybody have a prosperous day.